Professor Harris Lacewell, what would you add to that?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, I think it's quite important that we not try to write off Jeremiah Wright by saying he's wacky and out of sorts and completely nuts. I think that's not going to get us at all close to having this conversation. Part of what Obama's speech did, and I can say as someone who attended Jeremiah Wright's church for 7 years during the years that I lived in Chicago, is that many people, not only in Jeremiah Wright's church, but many African Americans agree with at least some part of what Jeremiah Wright is talking about when he's talking about his particular anger and anxiety about the U.S. state in relationship to black Americans. Part of that is the question of the HIV/AIDS crisis. Part of that has to do with continuing poverty and racial inequality. And I think if we're going to get to a place where we can have a conversation that has to do with healing, one of the things we have to do is to take seriously one another's perspectives, even if they seem quite different from our own.
There was, Michael Cromartie, a much-quoted line in Barack Obama's speech where he said the fact that so many people are surprised to hear that anger in some of Reverend Wright's sermons simply reminds us of the old truism that the most segregated hour in American life occurs on Sunday mornings. Now, is that true? And if so, how do we even talk about religion, race, especially in a political campaign?
Well, unfortunately, it's still true, and that's deeply troubling that the most segregated hour in America is 11 o'clock. However, I just want to emphasize, though, in the historic prophetic tradition, which I believe in strongly, the prophets were not conspiracy theorists. They did not blame governments for genocide by promoting the AIDS crisis. And so I think it's a little insulting to the history of the tradition to suggest that somebody who believes in these kind of left-wing conspiracy theories that this is a part of a prophetic tradition. It's irresponsible. It encourages sloppy thinking about how to get to social justice, and I think these quotes are direct quotes from Reverend Wright that have been coming out, and they're not good quotes.
Dean Lynn, do you want to come back on that about the prophetic tradition that you brought up?
Sure, I would love to come back on that. I haven't had an opportunity to listen to all of Reverend Wright's sermons, but I did listen very carefully to his sermon post 9/11, and he was clearly speaking about the psalmist and the kings, and he was quoting the psalm, he was teaching out of the psalmic tradition, and he was doing a good job of being a pastor. And what happened with the media is we pulled lines out of that sermon and took them completely out of context. And the prophets used huge metaphors. I don't agree with everything Reverend Wright has said, nor would I dare say that from the pulpit. But I think that the job of the church is to talk about difficult issues. And I think the truth is we've got to speak to the sin of racism and the sins that keep us apart from one another. And I think Reverend Wright is calling for that. And I think Senator Obama is calling for that and is allowing us a new moment in time.
I mean, Bishop Jackson, you started by saying that the proper place for much of this is in the church itself.
Yes.
But you espouse, you work for conservative values and policies. Mm-hmm. What's the proper place in the public square, you know, when you speak to the rest of America?
Well, I think there needs to be a free pulpit, so I applaud Jeremiah Wright's privilege to speak. It was a free pulpit that brought about the abolition of slavery. Free pulpit stirred on the Civil War, which actually freed us. A free pulpit was the beginning of the Martin Luther King Jr. Revolution in American thinking. And I believe that the black pulpit and the broader Christian pulpit can be that conscience to America that guides us. But I think that we need to clean up our language. You can't be a conscience to the nation and have such incendiary, hate-filled speech that many won't listen to you. You've got to find that common ground where you become a voice from God to a culture that wants to hear you.
Professor Harris Lacewell, how do you bring the church into the public square, or the theology or the talk that happens on Sunday into our public life?
Well, I mean, again, part of what's extremely important to remember here is that the separation between church and state is not only to protect the state, to protect the government from the influence of the church, but also incredibly importantly to protect the church, to protect that free and open space for dialogue. So we can be in the public sphere without being in the electoral arena. I think that Jeremiah Wright would be a terrible choice for the U.S. presidency. I don't think anyone in America should vote for Jeremiah Wright for president. On the other hand, I think that it is perfectly reasonable that thousands of Chicagoans make a choice to choose Jeremiah Wright as their minister, that they find under Jeremiah Wright's leadership not only sort of a political worldview that they find important, but also a moral and spiritual worldview that they find comforting. So I think there's lots of spaces in the public arena, whether it's through, 21st century spaces like the internet and the blogosphere, whether it's through citizen conversations. I think we've been challenged by last week's speech and by the sort of fervor around Jeremiah Wright to engage as citizens with one another beyond our own households.
Michael Cromarty, do you see this continuing? What should happen next?
Well, it'll definitely continue because the issue is going to be brought out by political consultants.
I mean, and as we go forward.
As we go forward, some of the comments that Reverend Wright has made, which are really damaging to a candidate who's calling for unity and healing and race, I think that will be continually part of our conversation. Again, if this was Senator McCain's church, you can bet if there was a right-wing conspiracy theorist pastor that Senator McCain sat under for 20 years, that this issue would be kept alive. And I think this issue is going to be kept alive in this case.
And a brief last word, Bishop Jackson, do you see it continuing?
I do, but the time for talk has passed. Let's do something. And I want to challenge the rest of our panelists to say, let's stop the segregation of the church. Let's take action. I plan to do some things immediately to begin that process.
All right, Bishop Harry Jackson, Dean Tracy Lind, Michael Cromarty, and Melissa Harris Lacewell. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.